Hi everyone, my name is Bianca, and welcome to Eres Tea Talks, where we spill the tea on taboo topics affecting our community.
"45-minute sessions. Who the fuck does that work for?
And so I think it's really interesting, right, to see the lack of space that's able to be held because we're tired. And then we realize why 45 minutes of a session in a space that is holding for us is not enough. So I really want to push this even further to talk about what this looks like in particular, right, for trans women, femmes, gender nonconforming individuals, individuals that identify queer, gender fluid, and even cisgendered women, right? Where do we fall on that spectrum? How does the roles and the constraints affect us, which then affects community, which affects home? What are we really looking at when we speak about mental health and mental illness and the effect on all of us and that who identify in those ways?
So much of mental health that affects queer and trans people are very specific to queer and trans trauma and what we experience in this society. So in my opinion, the best thing to do is to make sure that we have access not only to physical health resources, which is already hard to get, but also to mental health like professionals that are queer and trans and are part of our community. Because so often we're being treated by people who aren't part of our communities, and then they're diagnosing us with some BS and things that don't make sense because they don't understand our trans or queer experiences. And that furthers the violence and furthers the stigma of mental health and physical health, especially for Black and queer trans people.
And if you don't know to ask for that, as someone who identifies as gender nonconforming femme, the first, after going through so many traumatizing experiences with the mental health institution as a whole and treatment, I've learned to advocate, right? And be like, okay, what is your cultural background? Do you understand what it means to be part of the LGBTQ community? Do you understand what spirituality is? Because I'm not trying to say something, you're like, oh, you're schizophrenic, and get tossed back in the psych ward, So and then it's also interesting because I'm really fortunate to have the team that I currently have for my treatment. I love them to death. Shout out to y'all. And, they educate me like what's in the new DSM-5, right? That's what it's called, the DSM. And Mal de Ojo is on there.
Sorry, what's DSM-5 and Mal de Ojo?
I don't know if you guys want to break down what the DSM-5 is basically the Bible for
Diagnostic
psychology.
Statistical Manual. So now it's the most up. It's okay. Yeah. I try to forget it. All good. It's all good.
I know it's a Bible for these clinicians.
Yeah, and the most updated version is the DSM-5, and it's gotten rid of like this axial thing because it used to be like Axis 1, Axis 2, Axis 3. 5 of them, and it took it away. And Mal de Ojo is like the evil eye. For a lot of Latino, Latinx communities.
So they're starting to incorporate spiritual understanding. But it's also scary, So it's this weird space.
Yeah. I think it's gonna have to be a whole overhaul in the way we educate clinicians, because you can't learn it all, and if you're kind of focusing on all the white male theorists who came up with all the brightest ideas in the world and everyone else wasn't doing anything, then you're always going to have this problem of access and who do you connect to and asking those questions. Because even if you say, do you have any therapists on staff who identify as LGBTQ, the likelihood that they have more than one,
if at that. Right. How do you heal us if you're not part of us?
If you're not there or you don't understand, or taking one class on diversity doesn't constitute being well trained in how to work with a community who's understood trauma through this particular experience.
Exactly. Or even just asking for a brown or black person.
Yeah.
You know, like.
So imagine that, right? Like a brown or black, queer, non-binary. I'm being sarcastic. But
So sad yet non-existent, you know? And if you're looking for that, you have to go into urban areas, and then they're overworked and have huge caseloads and completely underpaid, and the bureaucracy, right, has turnover like it's nobody's business.
Yeah, and I think it also intersects because like we're also not getting educated, whether healers, social workers, nurses, what have you. Like, you know, do folks know the difference? Even people on the kaleidoscope, right? Like on the LGBTQIA kaleidoscope, like do people know the difference between like gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation? Like, you know, when I do trainings, I'm like, okay, we talked about gender identity and expression. We haven't even got into who you're attracted to, if you are attracted to anyone. You know, so it's like even within the queer communities, we can also like discriminate against one another, you know, and have this like, oh, well, bi really ain't a thing. You're not bi, just pick a team. Or, you know, oh, trans women are always blah, 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 blah. You know, and I hear it all the time. And one of the things that I notice the most as someone who does like therapeutic work and queer identified, like I notice that, you know, there's this big thing between like this, again, overdiagnosing with like bipolar disorder and things of that nature to people, especially like our Black trans women. You know, and I can't tell you how many, and as we know, Black trans women, right, are targeted frequently. They're dying at vast rates.
They have the highest rate of murder and violence enacted on them. I think there's already been over 5 Black trans women just this year alone. And if you go on the human, that nonprofit, the Human Rights Campaign or whatever, one of their research packets for like 2017 literally had Black trans women like all the way up here, and then it was like Latin women and just like broke it down. And so it's like some people need the numbers, right, to believe it. And I'm not one of those, but to see it, I'm just like, yeah, I know this, but wow, damn, you know?
Right. And like the cost of transitioning, right, in itself. I don't just mean like financially, although there is a massive financial cost, right? Like, so your passport or your driver's license, going to, so difficult. Right. And then it's so like emotionally difficult. So I noticed like with a lot of my trans identified clients, it's like sitting with them while they're being constantly discriminated against, sitting with them while they're constantly being looked at, and they're like, oh, you know, my 5 o'clock shadow's growing in, I'm not feeling this enough. Or even shoes, like that costs a lot of money. Like people look at just like Caitlyn Jenner or RuPaul or Janet Mock, and they're thinking like, okay, they look great, look, they're dressed to the nines, 10s across the board. But
and
it's
not
like,
all trans
that
women
costs money.
Yeah, and not all trans women want to be a part of the binary. And that's what people forget, right? You're re-traumatizing gender nonconforming, intersex, trans women, femmes, queers, down the line by not listening to them, by not addressing them the way they many times have politely asked you to, and then imposing the binary in a way that makes so many of us feel like, well, do I have to look that way? But I don't want to look that way. Like I've accepted this way, but you know, and then also not being violent, like those of us who choose to just like stick with what we are given, for lack of a better phrase, stigmatizing those that want to, you know, and then further enacting violence and oppression, which further traumatizes, which for many of them further pushes them into the scope of mental illness, you know? Yes. And I feel like they really get it the worst, and not, you know, having the who gets it the worst Olympics, but when you're really looking at how many factors are pushing up, if you were to make a Venn diagram, right, and have all the arrows and all that stuff, the queer community, just especially like trans Black women, you know, and there's just not enough. There's just not enough being done to support them, especially in the mental health system.
The binary is so violent to so many different types of people. And it's just like, if you don't fit in the binary, then statistically it's going to be harder for you to get a job. So even if you didn't want to transition, you might feel forced to because you feel like you have to fit in a box or fit in this binary way to pass or to perform in a certain way for society. And it's just like, if we accept that people don't have to, if we try to actually destroy the binary in the ways that we acknowledge and want to, then maybe it wouldn't be so hard to hire certain people or to welcome people in our communities. Instead, it's just this binary thing. And then that rejection causes so many people to need more mental health services that they won't have access to because of discrimination.
Right.
It's an endless cycle.
Oh, it most definitely is. And we've been talking about services a lot, together. And so what are, different ways of treatment in regards to like maintaining health, like a healthy mind in regards to mental health, and then treatment in regards to actually dealing with mental illnesses in whichever way that we talk about them or view them?
Unfortunately, I don't think the system has evolved to give a really great answer. Like, my answer to that is looking at alternatives outside of the system to maintain health. I think it's great to have a therapist and to have someone that you trust and enjoy and you can talk to for 45 minutes to an hour. That's great. But also having spaces like the one that you have and that you've co-founded, I think are really important, because sometimes you don't want to go to the clinical office to be seen or heard in that particular way. So I think, one direction I think is important for us as clinicians of color is to create spaces outside of the typical mental health institution. So we can have spaces that aren't clinical but are still healing. And give those kinds of referrals to our clients.
It seems like for me, you're definitely mentioning the idea of like holistic wellness. So seeing somebody as not just like, here's your mind, go to a doctor, and here's this, like, your leg hurts, go to this doctor then, and that's it, and that's all you need for treatment. It's really important to see someone for like their spirituality, their ancestral trauma, their home trauma, their mental health, and their physical trauma, and everything that they need to holistically be well. Sometimes you do need meds from this doctor, but sometimes you also need to find a spiritual community that you feel safe in. And all of those things should be helping someone gain wellness and gain wealth in their health mindset.
I don't think you're supposed to be in therapy forever. You come, you get
I
unstuck,
definitely heard that.
and then you go live your life. You're supposed to go live your life. You don't live your life in a therapy room. So so helping people figure out what that looks like. What does your life look like once you're healed? Because you can't be here broken with me for the next two years. That's not gonna happen. So my goal is to always empower people to go live your life. You're not coming to therapy because you got a date? Great. Just cancel on time so I don't have to charge you. But the idea is for people to live your life. That to me is liberation, where you're not stuck in this idea I'm sick, so I have to go to get my treatment, right? No, you're a person, you're a human, you're gonna evolve out of this. Go to your botanical garden, get what you need, and go be in your community, and I will see you in the community. That's my idea.
I think that truly a holistic, not the appropriated holistic, because whiteness loves appropriating Palo Santo and sage. Because didn't Sephora put out a kit with a crystal?
Which actually got pulled out.
Right, good,
because
good.
the community was no.
Good.
And those are already endangered. So much of our medicine is endangered medicine.
It's all endangered, And so, we're looking at herbalism, we're looking at movement, we're looking at community, we're looking at the arts, we're looking at music, and then we're looking, at food. We're looking at big farm medicines that, I'm on, and I was super anti-meds, but I need them, and coming to that realization has been very difficult. I still hate saying it out loud, but I'm but that's the reality, right? And then we're looking at CBT, DBT, I don't even know which other
Finding a
ones
balance between all of those that work for you.
Yeah. And the last thing I want to add is I guess naturally it's happened where some of my work has also led to these retreats. I'm lucky enough to work with my students on these retreats. And I do a lot of like healing rage, honoring rage work, you know, because I feel that rage, ancestral rage is not honored. Not the type, not anger, right? Because anger is like someone cut me off, fuck you know, like, but like rage.
Rage
it
is
comes-
deep. Rage is deep.
Right? And when we can like access it, not just once a year, but just like in appropriate, safe, contained spaces, it allows for like a lot of healing to happen. So with that rage also is usually connected to like systems of oppression, right? And like imperialism and so on, and how like a lot of people we had to leave our countries, you know, because the US went in and, you know, set up shop and killed our people and took our land and then told us that we were broke in a third world country, when the reality is y'all came in and oppressed and, you know, stole shit. So I feel like it's a mixture of like knowing that and learning that, because I think that the people also need to like relearn the history and like really understand what happened, what is this arrangement, how is it playing out, and how do you feel about it? Are you enraged? Are you anxious? Does it make you sick? You know, and then to like be able to release that. And again, not on people and hurting people, but in a way that also involves like spirit and connection.
I think that's a beautiful point, that history is healing, because once there's something about coloniality that makes you have amnesia. And once you forget, you know, you lose your anchor, you lose your position and figure out like where you're going. So there's something really healing, especially for me, going back in history. I'm like, oh, like these things happened. That's why we're here today. This is how you set up shop, right? And so it helps ground you out of this idea that, am I crazy for feeling this way? And you really like, no, there's a whole legacy to this thing that you're carrying. So I think that's important, not just for consumers of mental health, but also for practitioners. Like, we need to learn people's history, the history of this country, the history of this world, and bring that into our sessions with our clients so we can validate for them, like, no, you're not crazy. Let me tell you what this is really about. So that's a really beautiful point.
So is liberation a realistic endgame?
Always.
Yes.
Without a doubt.
So, you know, just to kind of like recap, liberation is a realistic endgame. We got to find balance, right, between Western ways of dealing with our mental health and mental illness.
Versus ancestral
as
ways.
well as looking for ancestral earth, medicine, spirituality, community. And it's okay to mesh those together as long as it works for you. Understanding the difference between mental health and mental illness. And that, you know, it's really, mental health has really been construed and skewed in a way that has separated us generationally. And where you don't want to be silenced anymore. So we're gonna push through, and you heal one of us, you heal all of us, break those cycles. So what can our audience walk away from? You know, this really beautiful conversation, and crucially important conversation that, you know, they can take home with them, or they can take community with them. You know, any thoughts or, you know, whatever's coming to mind for y'all right now?
My last thought is that people of color, and queer and trans people of color in particular, we deserve to heal by any means necessary. And if that means mixing both like Western and your ancestral practices to bring holistic wellness to yourself, then you got to do that.
I would add that I want people to know that there are clinicians of color out there who are educating themselves and trying to find ways to do this work, and doing it in the context of liberation. And that coloniality is a real thing, and it's not some old thing that happened in the social studies textbook, but it's with us every day in our institutions, and that it's part of what we're experiencing. So yeah, and not to be afraid to seek mental health, because there is a resurgence happening, and there are good ways to heal.
Yeah, and I would definitely add that it's really essential for people that are healers, therapists, clinicians, nurses, social workers, that we have to do our own work. Like, you have to do your work. Like, I just find it very disturbing. So before we mix anything or do anything, like, there needs to be like this introspective understanding of, you know, who you are, what are your triggers, what are some of your past traumas, are you taking care of yourself? And I think that a collective is essential. Like, I everything I do is on the backs of my ancestors and of my people and of the people that have given me EDs and discussions and held me down. So it's like, I would be nothing and I would have nothing to say if it were not for the people that continued. So shout out to them. And yeah, and I think that it's essential for our well-being and our mental wellness, you know, for us to be able to have folks that can have our back and not just immediately bring us to like the hospital or something, but to hold us down and say, no, you're gonna come stay with me for a few days. These wounds are very real. And if we need to take it another step, we can, and bring it back to like community collective.
Yeah, don't be afraid, you know, and don't be silent. It just no longer serves us.
Intergenerational trauma is probably going to look a lot different when our kids grow up because of this viral culture of being able to see everything.
Especially in this time, people are so quick to medicate and doctors are so quick to medicate. It's such a young age.
At some point, we have to take responsibility and we have to do the work.
If there's anything you feel that we missed or you'd like to share, please leave a comment below. So again, thank you. And thank you to our audience and our followers for joining us today. As always, follow us on Instagram at eres, eres.u